Welcome everybody to the AGI's Geo webinar series, our GeoConnection webinar for today. My name is LAILA Gonzalez and I'm going to be moderating this session, and I'll be walking us through a few basics before we kick off the webinar today. Now for today's webinar, our strategies for departmental survival and viability during economic downturns, we're going to be having three speakers. Jeff Weiss, who is the retired provost from College of William and Mary. He will be talking about making a case for your department. That will be followed by Michael Perfit from the Department of Geological Sciences of the University of Florida, who will be talking about departments at large universities, lessons learned from our near elimination and planning the way forward. And then we'll be closing up the speaker series with Michael Loudon from ExxonMobil, who'll be talking about leadership and thriving geoscience departments, observations from a global geoscience employer. And just to let you know, today's webinar is co-sponsored by NAGT and the Building Strong Geoscience Departments project. We'll be going ahead and kicking off our series. And Jeff, I'm going to go ahead and turn the screens over to you.
Okay.
And just give me one moment and I will make you the So there you are, and you can go ahead when you're ready.
Excuse me, building meeting V4.1 needs your attention.
My computer's talking to me. I'm sorry. Thank you, Lila. I'm Jeff Weiss, and what I'm going to talk about, and I hope you can see the first slide there, is a program that a number of us started probably started talking about it about 5 years ago. This came out of some concerns that I've had for over a decade, probably going on 2 now, about as I watched from various places geology departments get, oops, I didn't mean to do that, get eliminated or be threatened by elimination. So this came about through conversations that I had with my other PIs on this. At that time, it was Heather McDonald, also at William and Mary, Kathy Manduca at Carleton, and Randy Richardson at the University of Arizona. Since added Carol Orman from Carleton also as a member of the PIs. And as you can see, that this has been funded by the NSF since 2005. Our goal has been to assist geoscience departments in adapting and prospering in a changing environment, written there, and you can see that. This has been a very active collaboration with the Science Education Research Center at Carleton, the NAGT, AGI, GSA, and AGU. So this is the Building Strong Departments program. It's been funded by the NSF, as I said, for about the last 4 or 5 years. And our goal is to assist geoscience departments in prospering in this challenging environment. And this actually came about, obviously, before the current downturn, but many of us have memories of previous downturns when events comparable to what's happening now have occurred. Our basic fundamental premise is that understanding responses of other departments improves the ability of individual departments to respond strategically. So even though we note and have noted that each department is unique, has its own unique set of circumstances, there's enormous amount to be learned from other departments, their successes, their failures, the strategies they have used. In fact, many times in our experience, people have learned things from very different kinds of institutions. Research ones have learned from liberal arts schools, community colleges from research ones, and so forth. So it's been a real interesting process and a real learning process for many of us involved in this. What we've done to date is we've held 6 workshops. I've given the dates and the titles of those workshops here. That's what's important in that, essentially, is that we started doing this about 4 years ago. The first workshop we held, called Developing Pathways to Strong Departments for the Future, really defined the next 5. In other words, we brought a group of people together, we discussed problems, we discussed issues, and out of that came up with the topics, really, for the next 5 workshops, which were held then as recently as last June, when we held the Strengthening Your Geoscience Program workshop. So all the topics, all the issues were things that were raised by other people in these workshops as issues that and concerns that they confronted on a daily basis. We've held these workshops as funding is permitted. That's why there's sort of a couple of years with no workshops. But you can see that over over 200 educators have attended from about 159 higher education institutions, and that's about a quarter of all the ones listed by the AGI, so we feel like we've been able to begin to reach a significant number of folks. We've also created a website on which all the resources are posted. I'll talk a little bit more about that later and introduce that to you. We maintain an email listserv that has now somewhere about 325 members. We've given a lot of talks. We've published abstracts, one short paper. We've tried to serve as advocates in a clearinghouse when departments have been threatened and sort of help people. I know most recently we've done that with the flap at Michigan State University, which I understand is now settled down, but we try to be kind of a source and a central resource for people. We've held lots of workshops at GSA. We've held workshops with the HEU Heads and Chairs meeting. As a matter of fact, we will have one a week from Sunday on the 13th at the HEU meeting. What are we continuing to do? We're continuing to spread the word through talks and publications, and this webinar is a fantastic opportunity, and we really appreciate AGI's working with us on this. This is a great opportunity to reach more people. We're now doing what we call a visiting workshop program. This is funded by the NSF, and it's a collaboration with NAGT. What we're trying to do is bring what we've learned from these various workshops from this project to individual campuses to actually initiate and support conversations on campus and to help departments begin their planning processes. To date, there are 9 visits that are scheduled or in the planning stages. We've held, I believe, 1. There'll be 2 more this semester, and then I believe there's 6 coming in the spring. I've listed for you the people who are currently the workshop leaders. These have been people who have been very active throughout this project, served on kind of our steering committee, and attended multiple workshops. And as you can see, we've tried to have a variety of types of institutions and hope to expand this. The program through the NSF provides travel and expenses and brings for 2 workshop leaders at no cost to the institution. But the institutions provide all the on-site expenses. We've just gone through a round of selection of the institutions for the spring, and I think it's worth noting that we had 22 applications and we only had funding for 5, although we think we'll squeeze out a 6th one. But we're becoming aware that there's a fairly high demand for this, but our funding will run out, and we're much interested in anybody's ideas as to how we might find additional sources of financial support, because we really do believe that the demand is out there for bringing people from other institutions to an individual institution to sort of help them work through their set of problems based on what we've learned. So what have we learned? This is just a quick and dirty summary, and a lot of this is probably obvious to many of you. But these are the common attributes that we came up with of successful departments through lots of discussion and workshops and online and sharing of information. We find successful departments are dynamic, they're upwardly mobile, which is a way of saying they're ambitious. They manage change creatively and willingly. They're not resistant to change. They offer highly valued degrees by both the institution and external constituencies. They tend to be very student-centered. They have very loyal alumni. We often use this phrase, they know the rules and play by them. What we mean by that is they are savvy about their institution. They know where power lies. They know what committees make decisions. They know when decisions are being made. They're typically not caught by surprise, which often means that they are maintaining contacts through whatever means of university-wide committees. They might have somebody insinuated in the dean's office, but they know what's going on. They tend to be very congenial places. They tend to be collaborative in their working style. They have diverse faculty with a very good balance of skills and interests. And one that we're coming to recognize recently, and this is one that I think we came to understand through working with the folks at Michigan State in their recent concerns, is they are departments that can articulate an intellectual vision and articulate that within the institution and to the external constituencies. That seems to be very important. We shared some of what we've learned in a letter communicated to all geoscience heads and chairs about 3 years ago, as a matter of fact, in June of 2005, after our first workshop. We conveyed what we have learned about critical factors, and this is something sort of an expansion on what I just have said. We've learned that a department can strengthen itself by aligning their mission with the institutional mission and vision. So you have to, in fact, read those mission statements and those decanal reviews where the institutions set out their goals. And you have to be attentive to strategic planning on campus. You have to be proactive in building a dynamic curricula and a dynamic research agenda. You have to work as a team. You have to recruit, develop, and retain a diverse set of students, faculty, and staff. You need to develop and nurture departmental leaders. This is something that's often not done, not thought about. The departments need to be thinking about who the next chair is, who the new director of undergraduate studies is, giving those people opportunities to develop their leadership and managerial skills. You need to communicate success to all interested parties, and you need to forge strategic intellectual partnerships inside and outside the university, and that last one is very important. You need to forge partnerships with whether it's your engineering school or your school of the environment or whatever other strong alternatives there are on campus so that they're interested in your success as well. We've developed a bunch of ongoing resources. As I said, there's an upcoming heads and chairs meeting. I'm going to go to the website here in a second, but this is a website that you should all be aware of. I think it's a very useful one. And finally, we encourage anybody who has anything to share your things with us. And I've given you the email address of Carol Ormond at Carleton, who's sort of our webmaster and kind of helps us maintain all of this. And anything you send, we'll be happy to work with to make it part of this website, which I am now clicking on. And this is the website. I know that there's probably a delay here, but this is the website that we have developed at CERC at Carleton. It's called the Building Strong Departments website. If you look over on the left-hand side, you can see that we have a number of headings here based on what we've been doing over the last 4 or 5 years. So if you click on workshops, for example, this gives you the list of the workshops that I have mentioned before. So here are the past workshops that we have managed. You can see them listed over on the left-hand side. So for example, if you want to look at the strategies for successful recruitment of geoscience majors, which is a workshop we held in October 2007, this gives you the framework for that, the workshop goals, the 2 conveners who are Carolyn Isles at McMaster and Randy Richardson. You can read a summary, or you can actually go to the workshop program page, which will give you links to all the resources from that workshop. So here was the workshop. People who gave talks, you'll see Chris Keene was there talking about national recruitment trends. We've had, Barb Tewksbury talked about projects, and Tim Braylauer reported on the work that they've done, that he's done as chair of the head of the department at Penn State. So if there were video presentations and so forth, those are also included on here. I simply encourage you, I'm not going to walk you through this, I encourage you to go to this website, rummage through it, see what's there. For example, here are the examples of curricula and programs, as well as STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, education references that are out there. The reference here to an article that Tim Braylauer and Kathy and I did for the journal Liberal Education, which is something that goes to deans across the country, talking about the importance of earth science and preparing a new generation of citizens and scientists, trying to get our story out there to the extent that we can. We also have a publication, a paper in Geosciences and talking about this. So anyway, this is what we've been doing. We'd love to have you go to that page, and we would very much love your feedback through Carol or to me or Kathy or Heather about anything. What more can we do for you? What do you think is successful, what not? We want this to be a community resource, and we'd love to have your participation. I think I'm done.
Jeff, That was a great talk, and I'm going to go ahead and turn the screens over to Michael Perfit from University of Florida. So Mike, if you're ready, I'm going to go ahead and pass that on over to you. So when you're ready.
Okay. I will get this going. Can you see that now?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I wish I wasn't in this situation to have to tell you what happened, but I'm glad that I'm in this situation because it has worked out for the time being, at least. This is entitled Small Departments at Large Universities because although we are a Research One university, we're probably very similar to a lot of departments out there, medium-sized departments, in having about anywhere between 16 and 18 staff over the past probably 10 years, faculty, that is. And this was something that happened to us last spring. Right after spring break, I came back and was notified that they were thinking of mostly eliminating our department. And what's interesting in listening to Jeff's talk is that most of the attributes that he talked about that were good, we actually have. So prior to my learning about this issue, I was not worried. I told all my junior faculty not to worry because I was well aware of what was going on and we didn't have to worry about being eliminated. And as you'll see, we were sort of blindsided by this. So if there's anything to take home from this, part of this is you have to be very, very wary, even if you think you're doing the right things, because maybe of size. So the short story is that, oops, I think I just eliminated that. Hold on. The short story is that we've had a 60-year history. We rebuilt from the years 82 to 2000. We have a PhD program that only started in the 1990s, but we had an external review in 2006 that was excellent. They said that the university ought to invest in us and that we were doing most of the right things we needed to do. And then the budget woes came in, and the university was cut by about 20% over a number of years, which obviously really affected liberal arts and sciences as well. The change really in terms of understanding the politics was that we lost our previous dean of arts and sciences, and they hired a new one who didn't have any experience. He's a Russian historian and had never been a dean before and never been a department chair before. So that's part of the story here. As I mentioned, we learned about this, or I learned about this, by going to seeing the dean in March of 2009. And we were one of 3 departments in the college that were slated for virtual elimination. You know, who are we? Well, we've got 17 tenure-track faculty, 4 research staff, 2 lecturers. Almost everybody here is internationally recognized in terms of the research we do. 95% of the faculty are funded. We have $7 million in current grants, another 5 affiliates over at the Florida Museum of Natural History. You know, I can go on about all the things we have. We have distinguished professors. We have a number, about half the department have been noted as being term professors. So there's no question about our academic standing. Right now we have 44 graduate students, 30 of those are PhD, very collegial faculty, no internal problems. So there's nothing really on the horizon that I could see that would slate us for being picked for, you know, not being good. Let's see. In terms of undergraduate teaching, there's a little bit of a weak point here. Even though we teach over 1/3 of the college undergrads during their 4 or 5 years they're here, we only have 50 majors at the time, and that turned out to be a sore point with this new dean. We also have a number of research centers, and this, Jeff mentioned this about making connections, and I'll stress this was very important too, is that we have a center for isotope geoscience, one for paleomagnetism, one that's more of an environmental, it's a land use and environmental change. We have the scanning electron microscope facility, and we're a partner in what's called the Water Institute. All of these things turn out to be very important because without us, these centers really wouldn't exist, and many, many people across campus would not be able to do their research without our help. I'm going to move on from that. All right, so the timeline was, in fiscal year 2007-2008, there was an across-the-board reduction of 10% that added to a debt that the college already had that was about 10%. The dean that got us in that situation was let go, and they hired a new dean of liberal arts and sciences who had no experience in the fall of 2008. So in fiscal year 2008-2009, there was another 10% decrease in state funding. And it's prompted discussion about vertical cuts rather than horizontal cuts, which is what we had been taking. Those vertical cuts I actually voted for, because I thought, well, if they're going to get rid of weak departments, that's fine. If there's somebody weak and not pulling their own weight, that's okay with me. There was a discussion with all department chairs, including myself, as to what 10% I'd be able to give up, and we had already been cut back to virtually nothing. Our operating expense had gone from $60,000 a year to $20,000 a year, so we were really looking at maybe having to eliminate some staff. When I came back in late March, I had a meeting with the dean, and the decision was to basically cut most of the faculty, all the untenured faculty, from communication sciences, religion, and geological sciences, and that's when we started to get into action here. So the exact elimination plan was to fire all of our non-tenured assistant professors, lecturers, and research staff. That's 11 PhDs. To eliminate the undergraduate major, and the reason here was that, well, if we only had 50 students, that doesn't compare to the 1,500 sociology and psychology majors, so why should we have a department? I have to say there that on the list of things that this university has been focused on over the years, it's basically getting students in and out. It wasn't on the number of majors that you had in your department. That cut would have left 8 associate and full professors, and the dean's idea was by cutting all those people, we could then really get down to business and focus on graduate program. How you do that with just 8 people and no staff was beyond me, but that was some of the reasoning being given. So what were the reasons? He said you don't have very many undergraduate majors, and this is a worry because most of our departments, as you know, we don't have the huge numbers of undergraduate majors that other departments have. Part of that is just where we are, part of it is historical, part of it is things like not teaching earth science in the state of Florida. But it had never been one of the goals. It was never something that was on our list that we needed to do. In fact, we can hardly handle more than the 50 we have just because of space limitations. So the explanation then was that we could concentrate on the fine graduate and research program we have, but my response was that with 8 faculty and no research staff, you're not going to be able to compete with other Research One institutions. So the real answer, the real reason I think here was for the dean was that if I cut you, this would have the least ripple effect, and that meant the ripple for him. It had nothing to do with quality. It really had to do with size, and that's where we all have to worry about this. Well, my response to him was, I don't believe you understand the consequences and what the real ripple effect was going to be across the college or with our alumni and friends. So he knew very little about us. The dean knew very little. He got some very bad information because people just didn't tend to know about us, and maybe that's partly our fault, is that we didn't advertise enough. I mean, I think we all think highly of ourselves, the work we do, and we think it's very important, and I think I've realized that you have to be a good salesman for the things you're doing. We are relatively small, and that's the way we've been trying to grow for years, and they always keep us small. We don't compare at all to chemistry, physics, and biology they literally have as many postdocs as we have faculty members. The other problem was we happened to have a large number of untenured faculty and staff that were easy to fire, so there was no problems with the union. We are unionized. That would give them an easy way to save $2 million in salary money, which was a significant proportion of the amount of money that the college owed. The last point is that there was a lack of appreciation of what the importance of geological sciences was on campus and nationally, and we worked very hard at trying to educate people over the next couple of months. Some of the other problems is that there were no metrics that were used, and I can show you the metrics that we had to provide. That was one of the things we did, was to get all of the information together to show them how much we actually contribute to the university. They thought that we were small, but we were expensive, and neither of, well, the small is true, the expensive was not. By all of the full-time faculty equivalence calculations, any sort of use of per capita, we were very productive. So even with that plan, where there were going to be 8 of us left, when the president's plan came out and was published, it basically had us on the elimination list. So regardless of what we did, we kept finding ourselves on a list for elimination at the university. And the dean refused to change his mind. He said, I picked you, and maybe it was wrong, but who else can I pick? And I said, well, that's not really my problem, but you shouldn't pick us. So what were our reactions? Well, first of all, everybody jumped into the fight. I've got great faculty. We've got great students at the undergraduate, graduate levels. Everybody started to work on this. We started to educate the dean, then the deans compiled fact sheets about the department, faculty research, student successes. Fortunately, they at least listened to us, and we knew pretty far ahead of time how to respond to this. We stressed the collaborations around the university, particularly with the museum, whose students get their degree through geology, and with other universities. There were lots and lots of people out there, some may be listening now, that wrote letters of support. That helped a lot. They wrote them directly to the president and to the provost. We initiated a letter writing campaign to the dean, the provost, and the president. We had very good support from AGI, from ExxonMobil, were very positive letters. And I think that's an important thing, is getting support from the big boys, rather than just from your undergraduates who they don't necessarily listen to. We held meetings every week. We had meetings every day. We tried to get meetings with the deans or the provosts. Students went to see him. Individual alumni went to see it. We have some political context that turned out to be very important to us. And one of the things we did is we focused on our environmental and climate research and the importance to the state. Now, this is a bit problematic because not everybody does those things. Being an igneous petrologist, it's hard for me to support that I do climate change. But this was something that really struck close to home because it was one of the focuses that the university has on sustainability and climate change. So they at least listened to that. We also spent a lot of time showing what our teaching productivity was in terms of student credit hours. The revenue generated by teaching, you can figure that out. If you're being paid by the state, you can figure out how much each of your student credit hours is worth. We did a cost per credit hour analysis. And then we showed all sorts of metrics that showed research productivity and all the interdisciplinary projects that we had. This is just one of the sort of charts that we showed. What I'm showing here is the academic years along the bottom on the x-axis, and then things like undergraduate student credit hours relative to other departments. And there's just a couple shown there. Things like math and chemistry and psychology that have to teach large numbers of students are obviously, very high. But on any metric, we always, even though we are one of the smallest departments, we always rank quite highly because we're very productive. We did that in terms of teaching. We did it in terms of teaching revenue. And we did it in terms of direct research dollars generated. Again, per FTE or on a per capita basis, you can see that we're probably one of the top 10 in generating money. Unfortunately, none of these things really seem to strike the dean as being important. He stressed the fact that we had very few undergraduates, by far not the smallest number in the college, but the smallest number in terms of sciences. So that was held against us. The relationships we have, this is one of the things that did strike home because all of these other departments that work with us, every one of them work in our labs or with us in some way. And they all wrote letters saying, if you shut down their labs or if these people go away, what will happen to my graduate students? What will happen to my NSF grants? And that certainly rang a bell with them. So after 2 months of effort and stress, we remained on the president's elimination list. Nothing had changed. So we fast forward now to May at a faculty senate meeting when the president decides, although he doesn't tell everyone at the meeting because the media is there, he asks me to come outside, and so I follow him outside, and he literally says, no, I decided not to cut you. And the dean who was there says, yeah, well, I guess it was a bad choice. So we obviously made an impact somewhere along the way. How much of this was really political and how much they kept us on the elimination list just to garner support, I really don't know. I feel that there was a certain political aspect, but I also realized that a lot of it was because they just didn't know who we were. We were saved by stimulus dollars that came to UF in terms of money. And also a tuition increase that was improved. So where are we now? UF is now hiring, with stimulus money, 100 new faculty. Our department got a 30% increase in our operating expense, along with some other departments in class. The department was approved for a new faculty hire. So going from elimination, we now were approved for a new faculty hire in climate change and global change, and we have another one on the way in subsurface geology in 2011. The negative side, and the way I say we're not out of the woods, is because all faculty salaries are put on stimulus budget right now. We're not being paid by the state. and they've assured me, after we found out about this, that not to worry, that we will be put on state funds, that they just had to do this for sort of accounting reasons, or as you can see, political reasons. So what's the way forward here? Some of the things that the dean wanted us to do, we certainly jumped into action and said certainly we could do these things. We've expanded a BA program. We historically have had a very strong BS program, but it's rigorous, and it meant that a lot of students wouldn't take it because of the time factors involved, because a number of them don't actually get into geology until they find us when they're sophomores or juniors, and they just didn't have time to get through in the time allotted by the University of Florida. So we made this BA program more flexible. We've added more classes, but we haven't changed anything in our BS program, which remains a rigorous program. We've started advertising the major in lots of different ways, and advertising the department and working with advising here on campus. We've increased our collaborations around the university. We're doing more things to create visibility through outreach and communication. We now have a joint BA that they've approved or is about to be approved with the geography department, who is over in social sciences, that's called Environmental Geosciences. And this, again, will be a BA. It will be sort of educate the masses. I don't expect these people to become professional geologists, but we think that's okay. And we've already gotten another 20 majors this year already. We have the search going for climate and global change. And one of the other things that was suggested to us, which has turned out to be pretty important right now, is that we've created an advisory committee, mostly made up of professionals around the state. A member of Mobile Exxon is on this board. One of the executive members of AGI, who's down here in Florida, is also on the board. And they've been able to dictate a number of things that they think are very important for us to do, and the dean is listening to them. And he's sort of happy to have this committee, although they're not totally agreeing with everything that he says. So the next thing we have to do, and Jeff suggested this, is to really develop a clearer vision and image for the department and get some sort of a vision statement going that's in line with the university's statement. I think in terms of all of us, we have to work with some of the earth science organizations and try and get earth science in high schools. Florida has been very hesitant to make a required course, even though lots of people have been struggling to try and get earth science as a required course in high schools. We need greater promotion in the media, just in the importance of geological sciences. It's important also, I think, to get support from industry and government agencies so that the influence comes from above. You know, we can yell all we want, and I don't think it's important enough. We have to get the people from above, like the Mobile Exxons and the Chevrons and AGI, to do this. So we have to foster a relationship with what I call here powerful companies. And we need to communicate with political leaders, people in power here in the state, from top-down communication. So I think we see the clearing, as you can see there in the distance, but I don't at all believe we're out of the woods yet. I think at any moment they can change their mind on this. So we're working as hard as we can to keep ourselves in a good place here and to show the importance so that we don't get cut again. And hopefully this will just make us stronger. I think it has already. And that's where we are from Gainesville.
Thank you, Michael, for your presentation. And we'll go ahead and move on to Mike Loudon. And I will go ahead and fire up the slides for you, Mike.
All right, thanks very much, LAILA. I really appreciate it. I do appreciate the opportunity to talk to everybody. I have to say at the outset that I do feel a little bit awkward. I'm not an academic. I've never been an academic. And if you could go to the next slide, LAILA. I guess on the other hand, I've just tell you where I've been 30 years in a really fascinating business, and that's been characterized by a large number of ups and downs, which the graph at the right would suggest, and this would be accurate, are really tied to what's the price of the commodity that we sell. But you know, you learn a lot about sort of external pressure, and so you know, I've seen a lot of that. I've also done the leadership thing, and I'm going to talk a lot about leadership in this talk. Currently, I'm in global hiring and development for Geoscience, and it's been a fascinating job. I get to observe various departments actually from around the world, and I also have been active on the American Geological Institute's Workforce Committee. So I guess bottom line, I would just characterize myself, if you will, as a student of academic departmental leadership. Next slide, LAILA, thanks. So there is no question that geoscience departments are under a lot of external pressure right now. This slide can actually be found out on the AGI Currents on the www.agiweb.org, which LAILA actually runs for the Institute. But just looking at this chart, almost everybody, if you look over on the left, is expecting some sort of budget cut or has had a budget cut for 2009 or expecting one for 2010. Almost half of the departments are expecting faculty reductions and or hiring freezes. And again, almost half are seeing reduced support for their activities, whether that is getting lab equipment or IT support. So a fairly tough situation almost across the board. Go ahead, LAILA, next slide. And this is really important stuff. If you look at the sort of state of play with respect to age distributions of the existing geoscience workforce across a number of employment sectors, you know, things don't especially look rosy. I think the closest one to my business would be the black line. This is from the Society of Exploration Geophysicists. And yeah, I'm right there at the height. I'm 55 years old, and you know, the golf course beckons. So you know, at some stage, there is, and not too distant future, there's going to be an actual huge demand for new geoscientists to replace all these folks. The other sector I'd point out, by the way, is represented by the blue line, and that's faculty in the U.S. And you can actually see that over a long period of time, there's been pretty active hiring in U.S. departments. But as you get below the you know, the 46 to 50 range, you can see that actually young faculty over the last 10 or 15 years have not been really brought into departments, and that is of a special concern. So if you look at the overall problem from a workforce viewpoint, things don't look especially rosy. And so I'm going to offer some comments on leadership, and that'll take up the rest of the talk. Go ahead with the next slide, LAILA. So I'll start with some thoughts on leadership networks, and I think both Jeff and Michael have referred to these, and maybe not explicitly, but if you look at these people who are departmental chairs, you know, my hat is off to these people. They are already consummate networkers, and they will attest to all of us that this is pretty tough work just keeping up with those networks. Go ahead, LAILA, click. The one thing that I sometimes see is that these networks could use a bit more diversity, and go ahead and click. And often this means bringing in some contacts both with businesses, as Michael I think did a good job of illustrating, as well as governments, as well as local communities. And I think Michael made a very good case for what was going on at University of Florida and just how much their department's presence within the local university community, for one, made a difference to what actually happened. Go ahead and click again. Within these networks, so what makes them really work is there's lots of teaching and learning going on. There's lots of exchange of information. And that exchange is going on from very diverse perspective. So again, the more diverse that you can make these networks, the better. Go ahead, LAILA. And there also has to be a lot of engagement, and I think Michael did also a fantastic job of just talking about what sort of engagement had to take place. Go ahead, LAILA. And so, there's all of these interconnections going on with all of these different parties, and these little black arrows are meant to show that not only do you have to keep up with your own people within your own networks, but they're also talking to themselves all the time as well. And so, again, that just sort of demonstrates the difficulty of keeping up with all this. Go ahead. One of the things that really characterizes the network is that everybody has to be gaining value for themselves, or else they just tend to fall apart. And so, these you just don't get recruited to a network. You actually have to get something out of the network, or you just won't stay part of it. And so, again, this is one of the challenges that these department chairs are facing. Next. And I think Jeff did a fabulous job as well of articulating what is emerging from their work with respect to vision. Basically, my viewpoint has been that the most successful, or at least some of the most successful departments, have been led by people who have a very clear vision and whose networks are all around explaining that vision, informing that vision, and actuating that vision. So now I'm going to go on and talk about a couple of examples of that. So go ahead, LAILA. The first example is right here in my own backyard. I'm here in Houston, and this is at the University of Houston. And believe it or not, this department was a bit on the ropes not that long ago. But a new department chairman was tapped, Jack Casey, and I've spoken to Jack about this, and he's one of my heroes. He tells me that pretty much the first day on the job, he visited the dean and went and carried his vision also to the president, which this vision was very much around the fact that since Houston is one of the major energy capitals in the world, the University of Houston really needed to be very well aligned with that and to be a huge resource for that economic activity. So he proceeded to build a network around that vision. I mentioned the dean. Certainly he had to sell his faculty, and he did a fantastic job of that. He also engaged with local government. He also has been bringing industry into his network very effectively. And it's not just he's buddies with a lot of geoscience managers here in the Houston community, but he has made his educational facilities available to the Houston-based employees with courses that begin, say, at 5 p.m. so that people can actually get these courses and retain their jobs. He's also gone overseas, both in Russia and in Mexico, for instance, to teach and give university credit for courses given in these localities. And he's also engaged industry. He's put together some very world-class laboratories and actually getting industry engaged in performing research in conjunction with his own laboratories. And to make all this work, he's done a fine job of recruiting top faculty talent, actually away from various industry research efforts. So he's been very successful at that. And to do that, of course, he has had to, again, do a great job of communicating that vision. So LAILA, if you'll go to one more click, please. The second example I've got actually is Rutgers University at Newark. This is a program that in 2003, the situation was really dire. There were just a handful of professors. The graduate program had actually been suspended. None of the professors was actually very much engaged with either master's or PhD projects. So Alec Gates was tapped, and he really struggled with whether he should accept or not. It would have been a lot easier for him just to say, oh, the heck with it, I'm going to go to the main university at New Brunswick. But he instead opted to build, and his vision was that he was going to make that place, that university in Newark, an integral part of his local community. And he was going to build diversity, and he was going to recruit for excellence. And so he started his network around that vision. He sold the dean. He has brought in new faculty. He has done a fantastic job of bringing new students both into the undergraduate program and the graduate program. Crucially, he has engaged, for one, with the mayor of Newark, who is a personal fan of his, as well as his local community. He's also gotten very strong funding from the NSF, as well as ourselves, around his programs to build diversity in the geosciences. One mark of his success is that as part of his efforts with the local museum, right up the street from him, he's actually got 9,500 visitors a day at the so-called dinosaur days. It would be higher, but actually the fire department said no, that's the limit. So basically by now he is up to 60 very diverse, both in terms of global diversity and in terms of underrepresented groups in his graduate student population. So again, Alec Gates and Jack Casey both have enunciated the vision and have carried that forward to achieve success. Next slide, LAILA. So in summary, as I mentioned, everybody has a stake in all this. Whether you're in academia, business, or government, we really need healthy earth science departments, and leadership and initiative are really key to making that happen. So, how do you do it? How do you grow this stuff? And, I don't pretend to have all the answers, and my hat is off to people like Jeff at William & Mary who have been putting programs together actually to do some things around this. But just looking at the hurdles in general, this is true for physics departments as well as geoscience departments, but rewards really aren't tied to leadership. Rewards tend to be tied to individual performance, things like grants, things like publications that you can bring in and you can put your name on. Also, faculty training and development. People talk about the science, less emphasis on developing leaders, and Jeff touched on that as well. And then the very specific thing within earth science that I think is one of the buzzsaws that Michael ran into is that earth science just really isn't that well known either by students or campus administrators, and so tends to be an easy target. And with that, that's the end of the talk, and thank you very much.
I'm going to go ahead and open the floor here. So what we'll do is I'm going to unmute all the speakers, and we're going to move into our panel discussion. For the participants, if you have questions, go ahead and type them into your question box on your GoToMeeting webinar panel, and I'll go ahead and read the questions for our panelists. I have got a couple just to kick off the session. The first is, given the activities at Michigan State University, I was wondering if you could comment on what's going on there. Jeff, you had mentioned that that issue seems to be resolved at the moment, but I was wondering if you can go ahead and comment on what happened at Michigan State and what the current situation is there.
Well, yeah, I'm not tightly connected to that, but I have, they've been sharing their issues there with us through the program. I think they had a situation very similar to what happened to Mike at Florida. I think they got scrutinized because of their undergraduate enrollments in a college that counts noses, and I think they've come out well. I think they rallied people very much like Mike did. They got faculty from across the campus. They got the students. They got their alumni. They put a lot of pressure on the administration, and they were the one that articulated this idea that they really were able to present, although whether they had before, I don't know, they were able to present a really clear intellectual vision. This is what we do. This is why it's important, not just to this university, but to the state of Michigan, to the national economy, to the well-being of the American citizens and so forth. And I think they're now, at least for now, much like Mike, they're out from under the microscope. But I can tell you as somebody who's been a university administrator and had to make these kinds of draconian cuts on at least 4 occasions. Mike's example of his dean saying least ripple effect is a very profound one. People are looking for a way to make a tough decision without much blowback, and the answer to that is to create the blowback, and then they've suddenly got to back away. And I think that's what happened. My understanding is that they're no longer on the dock.
Okay. One other question that we just had from the audience was, what seems to be useful criteria for establishing advisory boards?
I can take a shot at that, at least initially. We struggled with this a bit. One of the things that I did was look at who came to our aid, who was really interested, rather than just going out and saying, would you be on this board, was the people who wrote, who most of them had been alumni who now were vice presidents of largely environmental firms, or I even asked people like the people who were involved from ExxonMobil who had written, who had talked to me a lot, and got these people who were in positions of power, if you want to call it that, positions of importance, and who knew the department, to sign on to do this. I then looked around and tried to get some diversity to make sure that I had all the bases covered within the state. I didn't want to go too far outside of the state, and maybe pick high-profile people, say from whatever, MIT or Caltech or something, because it really is a little bit political, and ultimately it rests with the legislature here as to what goes on. And if you can make the case that they really need our students, that it's really important, these are people that are now in important places in government that think that geology is a very important thing to do. Clearly here in Florida, it was a crazy decision with all of the water resources issues we have, with now thinking about drilling off the coast. All of those things, they seem to be missing until you hear it from somebody on the outside and saying, what are you thinking? This is our business. This is what saves your house from falling in a sinkhole, things like that. So I have a group. I asked about 20 people. Everybody said yes. And 20 people sounds like a lot, except at the 2 meetings we had, it's really hard to get everybody together, even being here in the state of Florida. So the last meeting we held, which was just a couple of weeks ago, only had about a dozen plus some faculty members. And that's sort of the track that I've taken. I have a mix too. I have a few academics. Largely, they're people out in the private sector. I have one person I'm trying to get from a non-governmental organization here to sort of protect the environmental side. But otherwise, I was trying to cover all of the major players in the state that are involved with geosciences.
Okay, thank you, Michael. We have a couple other questions from the audience. One is, actually 2. These are related. Will a formal partnering with professional geological organizations help departments? And also, do you recruit undergraduates in your introductory geology classes by showing them what geologists do in their career, as well as salaries involved in those geoscience careers? So I throw that open to Jeff, Mike, and Mike.
Well, I can tell you that from our workshops, departments that have been very successful have really stressed that latter issue. What you can do with a geology degree, and it isn't. There's been a lot of emphasis in some of these successful programs on sort of non-traditional. You can become an attorney and specialize in land use. You can become a city or regional planner. You can work for non-governmental organizations. I mean, and a lot of departments that have, and a lot of these things are on our website. If you look under the increasing your enrollments and retention, you'll see that departments have come up with some extraordinarily creative programs, materials. Dallas Rhodes at Georgia Southern has done this stuff very, very effectively, creating, brochures or talks or brief, people coming in and talking to classes about what you can do with a geoscience degree, and not just go on and get a PhD in the geosciences.
Yeah, if I can jump in there too, because I stress again is that in a big university like this, and many of you who are listening may be up there, is that it really came down to the total student credit hours, which you can teach in these big classrooms. But when now all of a sudden it becomes important to have undergraduates, well, now we have to change our tack. We really did not look at that very much, and now we are. And we have flyers, we put ads in the newspapers, and we have a PowerPoint presentation that we've given in our big lecture halls to try and induce students to take classes, and particularly with this BA program where students can jump in being sophomores or even juniors in some cases. It seems to be working. It seems that students just don't know about it, particularly in a state like Florida and many others where earth science is relegated to being a second-class citizen in the sciences, and all the good students are taking advanced placement chemistry and physics and biology, and earth science is somehow for the dummies, excuse my vernacular there. They don't see it. They don't get it. They don't realize how cool it is. And sometimes they take these classes and they say, wow, that was really cool. I really enjoyed it. But we don't tell them what they can do. We don't tell them all those things like being a lawyer, or they can go to med school, or they can work for an NGO. So far that's working. We've had a whole bunch of people lined up at our doors now, all of a sudden looking to maybe major in geology. So I think that's one way of getting students in.
I'd like to take a very brief stab at the question regarding the professional societies. My impression is that just having engagement with society per se isn't really the value add. I think the value add is that if via that relationship you are impacting something important, whether that's at a governmental level or you're impacting some sector of an industry, or you're impacting some aspect of developing new curricula, whatever it might be. But it would have to be some sort of impact that was facilitated by that relationship.
This is Jeff. Just quickly, I think one place where the professional societies can be very helpful in a very specific instance, such as one Mike's just been through, is to advocate when letters need to be written to provosts and presidents. I think, getting a letter from, and I'm sure that, you can do this, getting a letter from the President of the Geological Society of America, which has over 20,000 professional members, or from the AAPG, these are the kinds of things that are a little harder to ignore than just a letter from an alumnus from the class of 1972 who's given no more than $500 in the last 35 years.
And I think also one thing I would like to say is that how partnering with professional geological organizations help departments from AGI's perspective, because we do collect data on departmental information such as faculty enrollments, degrees, through our through our surveys that we do, providing that information to AGI, keeping information in the Directory of Geosciences up to date so that you have a national data set by which you can compare your departmental performance against, say, peer departments or the national trends in career information, salary information, enrollments, degrees, etc. Using that information to create those fact sheets like Michael Perfett was talking about is a great utility. Also, some of the things that AGI does is we have student recruitment packets that we offer to geoscience departments. We also have different careers information on our website, so we provide a service to geoscience departments that is very useful as well, and that's one of the things that we've seen in our relationship with geoscience departments. So we have a couple other questions from the audience. One is, will there be any future shifts or plans to focus more on applied geoscience at the expense of pure geoscience as a way to keep geoscience struggling against both funding and shortcoming and in the elimination in academia? I guess that's looking at a shift in the focus of applied geoscience versus pure geoscience research. I don't know if you could comment on that.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
I was just going to say, very quickly, I think this was definitely something that we saw in some of our workshops with departments where, more focus on hydrogeology or more focus on GIS kinds of things has worked very well in many departments. So I think you see this, the market works and people begin to think that way.
Yeah. To be to be candid about this, I think for a long time when those meetings about strengthening departments, I was looking at that list that Jeff put up there, I think we ignored them because we felt like we were doing what we needed to do here, and we were very science-oriented and very graduate student-oriented. It's still a relatively small department, so we are close to our undergraduates, but it wasn't a focus, so it didn't matter so much. And we were very focused on our BS, which is, like I said, it's hard to get through, especially if you're trying to do it in 2 years. You'd never be able to do it. So now, though, you say, well, okay, we have to change the way we're thinking about this. The paradigm's changed. Is it okay to have a whole bunch of BA students that you maybe can't spend as much time with? Because we're still, as somebody said, maybe it was Mike said this, is we're still held to, what do I get my benefits from? Well, as a researcher, well, it's money brought in, it's my graduate students, it's PhD students, it's the amount of publications. They don't care how many undergraduates that I see, and that's the dichotomy here. That's what we're struggling with. At the small undergraduate university, which is like where I went to St. Lawrence University, very focused on undergraduates. That's what it's about. So now we've got this dichotomy here between the Research One Institute that wants us to do nothing but research on one hand, and the dean who wants us to be looking at undergraduates. I'm not opposed to that because I believe in that as well, but it's hard to do both. So I think in doing that, though, we've had to sell it more and focus more on the applied side, the hydrogeology, the climate, if you call that change, the water resources here in the state. Where are people going to go out and get jobs? Well, they're going to get jobs in water resources. They're going to get jobs in the phosphate industry with Dow Chemical here, who does titanium mining, things like that. So we are, that BA program that we have with geography is much more applied than our BS program is.
I'd just like to add something really quick. I would always support, that the science should be applied and that the students should be exposed to applications. And to the extent that that's not being done, I'd really encourage it to be done. But the other end of the spectrum, if you will, is that at the end of the day, my feeling is that undergraduate programs need to produce good scientists, first and foremost, and just be careful that we are not seeing a bunch of people coming out who are more versed in the minutiae of petroleum geology or something like that. We can teach people about petroleum geology if they come to work for us, and I think that can happen in a lot of the other industries as well. The key thing is to turn out people who are good scientists, who are aware of the earth processes and how they interact, and how to actually apply that via the scientific method.
Right. Actually, if I jump back in again, Mike and I talked about this when we were at GSA. And it came up again in this recent meeting we had with our advisory committee, is that the dean wanted to know why we couldn't make money. If our students, particularly master students, were so valuable to industry, why didn't they just come and pay here so that the university didn't have to pay, that they would just pay? And there are these professional master's programs which are somewhat successful. They have them here in engineering, where students pay and they go out without a thesis. And everything that we've heard from all of the people in advisory committees and all the people in industry was, they do not want people at the master's level without a thesis. They want someone who's got that scientific rigor, which is what I hear Mike saying. So we're happy with that. But it was interesting that there's those two viewpoints. It's like, well, just pump out the master's degrees and they'll get jobs. And the industry is saying, we don't want them just to be master's students with a degree. We want them to have done science.
Right. We do have one question from Mike Perfit. Does the University of Florida have a formal and regular program review process for departments? And if so, did this play any role in your situation?
They do. You're supposed to be, I should probably know this number, you're supposed to be reviewed maybe every 7 years, something like that. So we had a big review in 2006. And this was another reason that I didn't think that we were in any trouble, because this review was really very glowing. And the only negative parts were things like the college ought to spend more money on us, and that they ought to allow us to hire more people, and that we don't have enough staff, and things like that. There were very few negative things. So when we brought that up and basically took the report over to the dean and said, "Look at this. We're doing everything we're supposed to be doing." He said, "Well, that was 2006, and this is today." It didn't count. It was revisionist history. So Yeah, we did have a review. I imagine, though, that had that report been bad, it would have been used against us.
Okay.
Let me this is Jeff. I can speak briefly to that as somebody who used to get all these reviews, for all the departments. Mike's right on. If it's a positive review, it's sort of well, what do you expect? You brought in a bunch of your friends and they think you're doing a good job. If it's a negative review, then you suddenly have grist for the mill. Now, what I will say is I have seen very effective reviews where the reviews were, and this comes back to what Mike Loudon was saying about leadership and networking, where the department leader had a vision and got the reviewers to discuss that vision and to validate that vision. It doesn't help when the reviewers come in and say, well, these guys need a new wing on their building, or they need 6 more faculty, or they need to double their operating budget. Everybody knows that. Everybody's going to say that. But when an external review can come in and really validate or promote a change of vision or a new idea or a really kind of engage the intellectual content of what is happening here, as a provost, when I saw those kinds of reviews, I would get very excited because it looked like there was a dynamic process going on here and we could see something really powerful happening.
Great.
One of the things that our review committee said, and I put up in my my talk as well, was that they said that we didn't have a clear vision statement, and that's absolutely true. I think that's the one negative thing, and I think partly because every time we bring it up, everybody rolls their eyes at the faculty meeting and goes, "Oh, vision." We all have a vision, which is like to get through the next day and get our next paper out, and get our students out, and we don't really have a clear vision. So that's one of the things on my list, my big list of things to do this coming semester.
We've got a couple more questions here. Go ahead and throw this one out to everyone. It says, if many of these decisions to cut departments are primarily financial, does the continuing threat suggest that geoscience departments are weak in their, quote, business planning, e.g. low grant revenue, high space, or salary cost, shrinking undergraduate market share, and should department chairs seek advice from entrepreneurs or business professionals?
Well, I think if you have all those characteristics, in these days, the bullseye is on you, and you're in trouble. I think that's a triage kind of situation, and I think that if you got that assemblage of problems, you need to have an emergency meeting and really turn this thing around pretty quickly, because that's not going to be easy to resolve without new financial resources. So, I mean, much of what I talk about is before you get to that point. Once you're at that point, it's much more, as Mike said, political.
Yeah.
And you're just going to have to work on that.
Yeah. Fortunately, we had a lot of those things in place already. The one weak link was that undergraduate, so you could at least fight one of those battles. If you had to fight all of them, I don't know what we would do. But they are talking now, because our budgets are not going to go up, about us all being much more entrepreneurial. We just had a chairs meeting, and he said you need to go out and find ways to bring money into the college. Not necessarily to your department, but each department is supposed to be finding money entrepreneurially, maybe off book as they call it, to bring money to the college because they're hurting so much. And I don't know how to do that. Most of us are not business people. In fact, the university is going more and more towards a business model, and we're sort of floundering trying to figure out how you actually deal with the business model.
Yeah, it is all about, at the end of the day, what value are you creating? And I think Jeff mentioned, well, you need to establish that blowback. Well, that means that by cutting that department, you're destroying value. So it's really the value proposition. So what's going on at this department that is creating value, and why is that good news for the dean and the provost, et cetera? Now, beyond that, in terms of how you get all this stuff done, the guys from the business world are going to be hopeless. Somebody like myself, I can talk about the value proposition all day long, but at the end of the day, I have no experience on how to actually actuate any of this stuff in that environment. But So, if you do bring people in from the business world, you just make sure you know why you're bringing them in, and it is around, what is the value that's being produced, and how do I make sure that people know about it. So there's a bit of a marketing element.
And I think you have to be very careful not to overreact and focus too much on one thing. A perfect example is many geology departments can point to the number of undergraduates that they serve in the Science Corps and say, well, if you get rid of us, those 2,000 enrollments or 12,000 enrollments or whatever it is at your institution, those are suddenly back on the market now, and who's going to teach those people? And as soon as the physicists and the chemists and biologists see that, they're going to panic because they don't want them. But on the other hand, the dean could come back and say, okay, fine, you don't need your graduate program anymore. You don't need a major. We'll just have a couple of people who do nothing but teach those introductory courses. So you need to be in a position to, again, have a vision of what you do so that you can persuade that dean who might be a class assistant, a provost who might be a chemist, why what you do is of preeminent value to the institution, and you want that to be in the context of what you see as your role in that institution.
Okay, so we have a couple more questions here. One is, if you increase enrollment substantially, how do you fund access to the key component of training associated with field courses in schools?
Yeah, that's a good question. That was, like as I mentioned, we had about 50 undergraduate majors, and we have a couple of vans, we have TAs, and we have labs that hold about 20. It's just the way this building was set up. So it means we have to run multiple labs. And if all of a sudden we have 50 or 60 people in a class, we run into trouble. I don't know how we're going to handle that. We definitely have a space problem here. And when I mentioned that to the dean, I said, okay, if I increase it, if I double our enrollment and we get 100 majors, 150 majors, what do we do? Where do we teach them? He said, well, show me the money, basically. Show me the students, and then we'll talk about it. So I don't know. Get back to me in a year, and I'll tell you what he did about that problem, because it really falls upon us. The other difficult thing, not only is the field part of it difficult, just trying to get them out there and have everything covered from a legal point of view, having the right people out there with them, or taking them to field camp. Our field camp is already filled up with the amount of resources that we have, but just spending our time, our time is already 120 or 130%, is that if you start to focus a lot more on undergraduates, which I wouldn't mind doing, but I have all of my other responsibilities to take care of as well. So I'm not sure how that's going to play out yet.
Okay, we've got two more questions. One is, this is oriented towards you, Jeff. How many of the geoscience departments and current tally of programs in the NSF-funded NAGT workshops are from large, i.e. greater than 15,000 enrollments, medium, about 10,000, and small, less than 5,000 sized academic institutions? Are there different strategies for geoscience departments at these various sized institutions?
Yeah, I don't. Unfortunately, I should have those numbers available, and probably there's somebody on this seminar who does, because I think some of my colleagues who are more aware of that. I would say we had very broad representation. I mean, there's no mode to this, to the people that participated. We had prestigious R1s, we had large R1s, we had flagship universities, we had land grants, we had urban comprehensives, we had small liberal arts colleges, we had tiny liberal arts colleges, and we had two-year colleges. So we pretty much covered the spectrum. I think one of the things that impressed us was how much people could actually learn from each other, at different kinds of institutions. I mean, when we would hold the workshops, we'd have breakouts, and we'd often have breakouts. Okay, all the R1s go over here, all the liberal arts people go over here, all the comprehensives, all the 2 years. But we'd also have breakouts where we didn't do that. And the feedback on our evaluations was very often that people were surprised at how much they could learn from a very different kind of institution in terms of strategies, in terms of specific initiatives that one can take. There's no question that if you're a research R1, your approach, your set of conditions, as Mike has talked about, are very different than they would be if you're an urban comprehensive full-time students and very few residential students and many non-traditional students. But on the other hand, luring people to the earth sciences is really the same thing no matter who you're dealing with. I mean, it's a great and exciting profession. It's a wonderful thing to study, and that doesn't make any difference whether you live in the Bronx or whether you live in North Dakota. That you can still engage people with that.
Okay, and we have a question here as well as asking, can anyone comment on the events that transpired at University of Connecticut a few years ago?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I have a colleague there who sort of filled me in. It was his one side of it. I don't want to say too much other than, a lot of the points that you had listed early on, Jeff, about having certain good things, and one of those was collegiality, getting along and not being a problem. My understanding is that there were a lot of problems there too, and that also was I don't know how many people were aware, but the department at Florida State University was eliminated. At the same time we were being eliminated, they were looking at us and Florida International as well. Would have left like 2 geology departments in the state of Florida. But Florida State, same thing, is they sort of had some internal problems. And if you don't have all of your ducks in a row and you've got something they can pick on, or some things they can pick on, it's difficult. And that was my understanding, is that there were some things they could pick on at Connecticut. But that's all that I know about that.
One of the things that I'm, kind of jumping on Mike Loudon's leadership and networking emphasis, which I think is really, really a powerful message, is a team-building aspect here. We often fail to build our departmental teams, and I don't mean this building research teams. I mean building the congeniality, the consensus. It's the power of pizza, as I used to call it when I was a department chair, getting people together to talk constructively about their disagreements and their differences of opinion, but realize that everybody, has to put an oar in the water to move this thing forward. And my impressions of Connecticut were similar, although they're quite anecdotal. It's a department that for many years I think lacked a sense of vision and a sense of a community. A lot of what I call happy departments talk about things like community.
We do have one final question from the audience, and it has to do with, in situations such as in Connecticut, this is the statement. It says, I work up in Connecticut, and I teach geoscience students at local colleges and universities, and up here it's very difficult to persuade faculty that students are interested in hearing from the private sector, whether it's environmental consulting, mining, or oil and gas, etc. What advice or strategies would you suggest for dealing with that type of situation?
Let me see if I have that correctly. So this is from a student point, is that they're not, the faculty isn't responding to their requests to hear more practical science? Is that what the question is?
It's more that coming from a business professional into academia, so from industry into academia, wanting to speak to students about private sector careers, etc. To students, looks like the stopgate is the faculty members.
Yeah, right. I think that we were not guilty in not wanting to do it. We just didn't think about it. And one of the things that, like, the graduate coordinator and the undergraduate coordinator and the chair have to be is they have to be open. I have an open door policy, and I get students in here all the time who want things, and sometimes it can't be done. But something like that, I don't see any reason not to. I mean, you do have to be proactive. They have to be proactive and come to tell you. They can sit around a lot of times and complain, but they need to have that ability to come and talk to someone and say, we think this is a good idea. And if you get 2 or 3 students to say that, I would do it.
I think one of the potential things for us to do is things just like this webinar that periodically people talk about. What are some of the opportunities out there, whether it's in resources or it's in environmental or whether it's in academia, and and just sort of, well, in a sense, go over the heads of any of the folks who are not cooperating on that. But I mean, that's a really great service I think the AGI could perform.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that's all of our questions for today's webinar that we have so far. If any of the participants, if you have any further questions, you can go ahead and email them to me at lmg@agiweb.org. We'll make sure to get your questions out to the speakers, and we will be posting the recording of today's webinar on our website later on, so check back, as well as the question and answers. We'll post those too, so you can refresh your memory as to what was asked and what the answers were to that. So thank you, Jeff and Mike for speaking today, and that concludes our webinar for today. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, LAILA.
Thank you, Lana.